Chapter 8, Finishing Up. Way back in Chapter 2, we started work on the player, but we didn't finish him. Here in Chapter 8, we're going to finally do that. Our player has still got a bit to go, including collision, death, life respawns, level progression, and animations. We'll start with the level controls, so that the player can finally finish a level. Before we can create a new level though, we're going to need to be able to destroy levels that already exist, so the first function we're going to add will be called level destroy. Next, the player will need a way of resetting all its variables for a new level. Add the following into the player script. We set up most of the animations back in Chapter 3, and the rest followed on after that. All except the players. The players' animations have been deliberately left alone until now, because the events that triggered them weren't ready. They are now though, so let's animate the player. Start by adding an animation controller to your player's prefab, and set up the following animations. We want to access the animation controller from within the player's script. This means the player is going to need a reference to his newly created animation controller component. We also need to initialize said animation controller when the player is created. Add the following into the player's start function. Now we can make sure that the player's running animation and hammering animations will work. Append the following into the player's input moving function. Our jump animation is really just a freeze frame of our running animation. Add the following to the player's jump function, still inside the if statement. And finally, our player needs his climbing animations. Append the following into the player's input climbing function. The last two things our player needs is collision with our enemies and death. So first, we'll add a way of calling level restart from within the player script. We'll call this function restart level. We are now able to write the player's collision function. We have to add in trigger collision with the barrels too. Add this to the player's onTriggerEnter 2D function, where the to-do marker is. As the other deaths of the player are all event driven, the only condition we actually need to check for is if the player has fallen below the level bounds. We'll call this function deathCheck. Add the new deathCheck function into the player's update. First, we'll need to include Unity's UI library into the player's script. This gives us access to things like the sprite type. We'll start the usual way, by adding variables we're going to need in the player's script. Touch input works vastly different to handling keyboard input. Here, we have to run a loop to handle each touch, and then determine from the input data what we're going to do. We sort our touches by screen halves, with the right being the A button and the left being the D-pad. If we've tapped the right side, it's as simple as calling jump on the touch's beginning phase. However, on the right side, we need to work out the direction the player is drawing on screen before we can call the appropriate function. This next part calculates the direction the player is drawing and calls the correlating functions. Add the following at the input touch's to-do marker. We also have visual elements to show the player what is currently being called based off the touch input. We will need to assign all asset variables with our D-pad and A button sprites in the player's prefab. Next, we need to create the visual D-pad and A button prefabs. Our D-pad and A button will always be present in the hierarchy. Therefore, instead of instantiating the object, we'll simply grab a reference to the objects in the player's awake function. While we're here, let's take this opportunity to also check if our game is running on a phone, and if so, create a new camera and set it up so that the view is a little closer to the player, as being completely zoomed out on a phone makes for some pretty small gameplay. Append the following into the player's awake function. Let's activate our new touch function by adding it into the update function. Add the following above the switch statement, but within the if game state statement. One last change we need for touch. Currently, our animations are tethered to key presses only. We're going to need to change this for touch. Modify the following code inside input moving to include the new bold lines. We will also need to do the same thing with input climbing. A game isn't complete without background music and sound effects. To play a sound file in Unity, an audio source component needs to be used. Audio source components allow us to play a single sound file at any one time. However, this is not so great for dynamic sound. To solve this problem, we'll create an audio prefab with an audio source attached to it, so that whenever a sound needs to play, we can simply spawn another audio prefab object and delete it when it's finished playing. So let's create that audio prefab now. Open the level factory script and add the following variables to store the audio clips and a reference to our audio player object. So while we're still here in the level factory, next we'll create a public function that we'll use to play our sounds. In the editor, attach the prefab audio object we just created and add all the sounds into the new sound asset variable slots. It's now time to navigate through our scripts and add the sound calls in the appropriate locations. Congratulations! You've finished Chapter 8, and you've finished off your player. If you've done everything correctly, you should now be able to save, compile, and run your project. You should now be able to climb to the top of the platforms and progress to new levels, as well as have all the players' great-looking animations. Watch out though, because it's now a challenge, and you can die. Note though, that nothing will happen when you actually do run out of lives. We'll take care of this in the next chapter.